Hey,
Hey, how are you?
good. How are you?
I'm doing good. How's my audio? Is that okay?
Yes, you're good.
Ah, very good. Okay. All right. I'm trying something new. I've got like the camera. It's like camera plugged into the laptop with like a wireless mic plugged in on the other side. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes.
No worries, no worries.
Oh, hey, how are you?
Not too bad. How about you?
I'm doing all right. Here, give me just a sec. Let me actually grab a deck. Otherwise, I'm gonna feel kind of naked here. Give me a
No
sec.
worries.
Mm. What's a good one? Oh, those have a border. It'll work. I'm gonna be fastidious. I'm gonna grab like three decks. There we go. Okay. Go over here. Yoink. Okay. Crisis averted. Town saved.
All right.
And let me actually turn this up just a smidge. There we go. There, that's a bit better. Okay. Hey.
Hello. So, kind of how this works, I just kind of interview people, ask them questions. So, got some questions prepared for you.
Okay.
What is your first memory of magic?
First memory of magic was like the one that is most prominent is my mom took me to, well, it's a combination. One was TV, right? Watching David Copperfield do his specials back in like way early. We're talking like very early 90s, right? Lots of puffy shirts. And watching him fly, that was always like that was a big thing for me.
Okay.
Um, but my first experience of like actually engaging with it, my mom took me to the library, the Costa Mesa Library, and there was a magician there. And you could go see the magician. And then if you paid like $10, you got to stick around and he would teach you a bunch of the tricks that he did. And he would give you like a small set to like take home with you. And it was like in a Ziploc baggie or something like that. But I remember number one, it was one of the coolest things that I'd ever seen anyone do. And number two, I carried that Ziploc baggie with me everywhere I went.
Nice.
Um, and shortly after that, that was like one of the initial bugs that bit me. And then my uncle got me a set from Mark Wilson. It was called Mark Wilson's Complete Course in Magic, a giant book, a couple of like props and everything. And the props died out quickly, but that book stayed with me forever. I still have it.
Oh, okay.
Um, and it's like one of my prized possessions. It's one of the original large hardbacks, but I was terrible at reading. And so I just looked at the pictures. And so I was very bad at magic for a really long time because I didn't read. And I would say, yeah, that's probably the earliest I can think of.
All right. So, I know for many people, the reason they start in magic and the reason they stay in magic are two different things. So, what was the reason that you stayed in magic?
I stayed in magic because, I started because I wanted to be a wizard. I stayed in magic because it made me feel unique.
Okay.
It's kind of an odd thing. Lots of people were musicians, very few magicians.
Hmm.
And especially in school, it acted as a bit of a social crutch for me whenever I'd get like anxious about being around new people. I could point at this special thing that I could do, and very often it would make me more welcome in those groups. And that was really important to me early on because social situations, I couldn't quite get a read on people. But if I could give them a read on me, it made things a lot easier to engage with. So
Okay.
I would say that the social aspect kept me in it. And then as I grew up, um, it just kind of became a part of who I was. It became part of my identity
Yeah. Okay. Why did you choose specifically card magic over a different facet of magic?
because you could do anything with it.
Definitely.
It was very versatile, like coins. There's this idea that you can limit yourself to a certain medium, and by limiting yourself, it forces creativity, right? And there's definitely like a diminishing return. You could limit yourself to like four cards, and there's only so many ways that you can manipulate four cards, right?
Hmm.
Coins for me, it was much the same. I studied coins for a lot of years, and I found that because coins, it was always predominantly sleight of hand and very little opportunity for narrative. It felt limiting to me. And then cards, it was just the world was so big. Like you could spend your whole life studying everybody and you wouldn't even keep up with what's coming out that day. Like
Yeah.
there's just so many different ways. There's handling, there's sleights, there's narrative, there's routining, there's false calls, there's gambling sleight. You just can't run out, you know? And so it gives you the ability to swim in whatever interests you. Honestly, you know what it is? It's like the equivalent of like a really bookish person getting to walk through a bookstore,
Okay.
right? And they can just go and find the books that just intrigue them.
Hmm.
Card magic is much the same way. You can find styles and histories and like I'm big into like the French aesthetic, right? The way that the French handle cards is aesthetically beautiful. For
Hmm.
them, the method must be as pleasing as the outcome, right? And then for narrative, I go to the Spaniards, right? Because they create the most intriguing routines,
Yeah.
right? Um, for presentation in general, no one beats Japan. Just the way that Japan does it, they're just and it's infused into like the culture of magic that they have there, and it's weirdly regional. But
Hmm.
that's what I mean. Like you could start with a deck of cards that you bought from like a drugstore, and it opens the world
Yeah,
suddenly. So
definitely.
yeah,
Okay. How many decks of cards would you say that you have?
4,000,
4,000. Nice. I'm not quite
somewhere
there.
around there. But some of that was a lot of them are my decks. You know,
Yeah.
I ended up when I created decks because I was doing it with friends. Um, they were really kind, and they, as part of like an agreement, whenever they would make those decks, they would send me like a gross
Hmm.
of them, so 144 decks. Um, and then I had a lot of people that were I was running a jam for like 7 years. It was great. And that jam would happen every single Monday. And very often creators would sponsor the jam by like sending me enough decks that I could give a deck to everyone that showed up,
Okay.
right? Or they'd send me like a variety of decks that people could like just pick. Because a lot of the people that were showing up, they were younger, they were kids. They didn't have like money to buy like all the fancy decks and everything. And whatever was left over was my responsibility. And eventually it got to the point where like all these kids had like too many decks,
Hmm.
but these guys still wanted like to sponsor. And so I ended up with a bunch of like overstock and it just sort of stuck around. So yeah, I actually have a bunch of like decks sitting in storage right
Nice.
now. I can't like, yeah, but
Okay.
yeah.
So you posted very consistently for a long time. What was your motivation to stay so consistent?
Um, Some of it was that I found it very relaxing to like create content for a long time.
Hmm.
It was just something, in order to create content, most of the videos that I was making were actually just practice sessions, and then they were split up, right? And then somewhere around 20, I would say like 2020, 2021, um, they became more pointed toward helping my friends like advertise their deck. So they would send me one of theirs and I would just do a video for
Hmm.
it, right? I would showcase it while doing what I did. Um, and I think the fact that I was doing it, one for me and two for my friends, it made it very easy. I'm not particularly like financially motivated, so I wasn't great about like trying to convert it into like a business venture or anything like that. And also, I definitely have like this anti-authority thing. Like the second you tell me I have to do something, my inherent response is, screw you, strongly worded letter to follow.
Fair.
And so when the algorithm started like trying to force people to post consistently in order to be engaged with it all, that was when I backed off. And I would say honestly, the trick for me with consistency was having a reason outside of myself that was good, that I felt was positive.
Okay. So I've heard you say that Expert Card Technique is the most important book you've read. What about it specifically have you enjoyed, and what has made it the top book for you?
Excellent question. Very good question. You've done your
Thank you.
research.
Yeah.
You were very good at this game. Uh, I would say Sundry Slights was my
Okay.
favorite section because it made me feel like a badass. Like going through it, it was, and the fact that the the book itself is kind of a TARDIS, right? It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Definitely.
And and the fact that it's got kind of like this vibe where the Phantom at the card table sort of makes this point that it was kind of a follow-on to uh, Expert at the card table, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's true and not true. I think that it was an incredible collection that was made somehow by hook or by crook by these two guys who are on opposite ends of the world,
Hmm.
and yet it has stood the test of time. And there's so much in there. That's again, that's part of the reason why I think that one is so important. Number one, it was one of my very first books. So some of this is just like, like it's like your first love, right? You never forget your first love. This very much for me was my introduction to all of these different things that you could do. I figured like a card trick was basically one complicated version of hide and seek, right?
Okay.
Oh, your card's lost and it's here, right?
Hmm.
It came to the top. Like that was my only experience before then. And then all of a sudden there were all these different types and sleights and things. And you find out about utility, you find out about routining, you find out about theory. Like you hand a kid a deck of cards and this book, and if they have this interest in it, that could hold them over for years.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, that's I was always fascinated by that.
Understandably. So I know you're a member of the 52. Why specifically the 10 of spades, and what does that mean to you?
So the Ten of Spades actually told this story at one point. When my father had passed, it was sudden, right?
Hmm.
My brother called me to like come to my parents' house to like go help my mom and everything, and I rushed out of the house. And I'm the only religious one in my family, right? I'm a Catholic. Um, And I had forgotten my rosary, and my mom had asked me to like pray for my dad's soul and all that. But the trick of the rosary is that it's very tactile. It's a very tactile prayer,
Yeah.
and I needed something, and so I remembered that I had like a deck sitting at the side, like in my car, and it was the Republic deck.
Hmm.
And I took out the 10 of spades because it was the first 10, right? And you can use the way that the 10 is configured is effectively like a decade on a rosary, right? So you've
Okay.
got like the opposing indices, and then you've got the 10 symbols, right? When you're looking at that, it means that you've got, the Our Father in the top, all the Hail Marys, and the Glory Be in the corner. And so that's what I did. I just sat there and I was using that as a rosary that day. And just because it was a very traumatic day, and because that was such a like helpful thing during a very hard time, it became not, I would say, yeah, go ahead, you're fine. It became kind of a minor obsession. Um, not because it's bad, but because it was just something that it latched on to like who I was, right?
Yeah.
And so I started doing the like 10 of spades thing. I started using these all the time,
Hmm.
everywhere. I got the tattoo of that particular 10 on my arm.
Yeah.
And so when I was asked to be part of the 52, uh, the 10 was just sort of the natural choice. That, and it's kind of reinforcing. So, like if you like have a bunch of cards on you and they're all different cards, then you can never do the prediction trick because
True.
then they're like, you're like, well, on the inside of my big toe, I've got like, and I wanted, the being asked to be part of the 52 was a very big deal for me.
Hmm.
And there was like a camaraderie and everything. And I wanted to attach something that meant something to me to something that meant something to me. And so
Okay.
the 10 of spades was a very natural link to that. And it's a
Makes
great
sense.
card. I'm sorry. I don't care what you
Definitely.
say. Like, don't get me wrong. Aces, yeah, yeah, yeah. But tens, oof. So
Fair, fair. Who are some people that inspired your specific performance style?
we're going to be here a while. It's going to be. I can tell you that I will sit at the feet of Helder Guimaraes and Ben Earl every single day.
Okay.
I think that in terms of magic as an art form, no one that I know of personally has pushed it further than Helder. And Ben is the first person that I ever met who made magic, made the learning of magic as intriguing and I want to say the word is appreciable, right? The ability to appreciate the fact that the learning of it could be just as fascinating as the execution of it, as the presentation of magic. So like he has a subscription called The Family. And
Hmm.
if you watch it, he's got like professional editors and lighting and all of this beautiful stuff. And that was very, very much on purpose. And I love that. I
Yeah.
think that's just the coolest thing. Um, and then I had a lot of contemporaries and a lot of guys that were younger than me that really like pushed me. I can tell you, I really got obsessed. I was a balance between Jason England and Babel for a
Okay.
really long time. Babel was where I gained an appreciation for the French aesthetic. And Jason was the guy that gave me my intro to like basically gambling sleight of hand, right? Table work. Um, and then after that, it was just kind of a collection of people. Jason Ladany and I would go back and forth for hours. Uh, um, we met up in England and we became instant besties because we were effectively like roughly the same person, just different mentors.
Yeah.
Um, and then there were a lot of people like Andrew Frost and Avi and Victor Pina and Andre Pshenichka, all these guys, Jan Frisch, like all these guys where you can tell that, yeah, they have learned well, right? They
Hmm.
have obviously learned their art very well, and yet still they are pushing it in a direction that I had yet to see. And so I would say those guys, I so very often, surprisingly, learn a lot from guys who maybe have been in it less time than me.
Hmm.
And that's a very humbling experience because it shows like the power of like focusing. For me,
Definitely.
it was always like, because this isn't my profession, this is something I do for fun. When I sit at the feet of like a professional, it's a different experience,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
Okay. How did you come up with your staple of setting the card box on the table and walking off at the end of your videos?
Oh, I needed to do something. I didn't want
Okay.
to snap because everyone snaps. And I wanted to do the thing where there was a pattern to what I was doing, right? I'd come in, I'd flip the deck, I'd set it down, and then I'd begin, right? And so there wasn't, even though there wasn't a story, there was at least yeah, I guess just a pattern to my videos where there was a consistency,
Okay.
right? And then if I had that, I could set that aside. It's like the person who always dresses in the same style of clothing every day. Now that's not on their mind. It's not something that they have to worry about. If I knew the form ahead of time, I could focus on the slides and not have to worry about performing for the edit because I knew what the edit was going to be afterwards, which meant that I could use whatever I had for the edit because that was already decided.
Hmm.
And then the ending was just a way to like extra showcase the deck that I was playing with. Because I would start, I'd flip it, I'd show it, and then I'd go. And then after everything was done, it put like a stamp on like, okay, these are worthy. These are absolutely like totally usable and
Okay.
all that. So yeah.
So I've heard it said that it's important to practice difficult sleight of hand so that when you perform simpler sleights, you'll get them right every time. Do you agree with this philosophy?
I would say that sounds more clever than true.
Okay.
And I say that only because difficult sleight of hand, the line between difficult and simple is not as clear cut as people may think.
Hmm.
If I execute a difficult palm, does that mean that I execute an easy, quote unquote, easy palm if I haven't consistently practiced its form, right? Because technically all we're talking about is form
Hmm.
and the number of steps that you have to go through and the number of things to consider, right? But say somebody learns to play a beautiful piece of music, Beethoven on the piano, right? But they've never actually practiced chopsticks, and then you ask them to play chopsticks. Yeah, they might catch on to it more quickly
Hmm.
because they have a large base of knowledge, but they're going to suck at first,
Yeah.
right? It just means, I think, that your level of suck doesn't stick around for as long. Like
Okay.
you learn, I can tell you that you definitely learn routines faster because eventually your toolbox fills up so much that you can call on the proper tool at the proper time. Um, but there's no guarantee that you'll perform well unless it's something that you in particular practice,
Okay.
right? Um, yeah, I'd say that's probably more true is that you execute well what you practice, right? You don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. If you haven't
Definitely.
trained a thing, you just keep falling.
Hmm.
So,
All right. So I've heard you mention you worked at Borders bookstore and had to be decently well read. What are some impactful books you remember reading at that time?
Lasting Contribution by Tad Waddington was a know-nothing book, right? It was maybe 105 pages. Book was like that big, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it was one of the smartest books I'd ever read because it was like having 10 books in one. Tad Waddington has his doctorate in Chinese hermeneutics,
Okay.
um, and is probably one of the smartest people walking the planet. And this tiny book was just like, you could tell it was a piece of him that he threw on page. And this guy must have been the most intriguing person at every party. Just knew a little bit about everything,
Yeah.
right? Um, I can tell you there are several books that stayed with me that I still recommend. Everyone should read Patrick Rothfuss, The Name of the Wind,
Okay.
because it's just one of the most beautifully written books that I've ever read. The story is great. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong. I think the story is wonderful. I think the fact that it was told by Patrick Rothfuss and his ability to put words on paper to describe a situation so uniquely. You know, um, he's describing like one of the main characters, and this main character is kind of like hiding as a tavern owner,
Okay.
right? And he goes to describe him and the way that he is. And it's this one sentence that I swear to you will be my next tattoo. I'm going to get half of it here, half of it down there because it's just this beautiful phrase. He says, and he moved with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things.
Okay.
And it's this beautiful thing. So what's funny is that I told this to one of my buddies, Elliot. Elliot is he's a clothier and he makes made to measure suits. Um, but his passion is very much like he infuses magic into everything he does, including the suits. So he made a suit for me from scratch. I picked all the material and everything.
Nice.
And um, he put the initials of that sentence on the inside collar of my suit.
Okay.
And then when he made me the shirts for that suit, he did the same thing on the collars of the shirts.
Nice.
So yeah, I would say The Name of the Wind is probably the best magic book that I've ever read, if only because the magic system in it is the idea is that you only control the things for which you know the true name of, right?
Okay.
And the premise is, the name of the wind is nearly unknowable by everybody. You can't control the wind, you can't fight the wind because you don't know its true name, right?
Hmm.
And that's sort of like this underlying magic. Around it is just this sympathy, right? That everything is balanced, right? And that you can bind this balance between objects. Um, but that the real magic is the fact that you know the true name of things, right? And I love that. I love the fact that like to know a thing truly is to control it completely. right?
Yeah.
And for me, that sort of like spoke to magic, right? To know exactly what a thing is from every viewpoint, to know like even something as simple as a shuffle, right? To know the mathematics of a shuffle, to know the randomness, to swim in the chaos and see order, I feel like that makes a shuffle infinitely more interesting, right?
Hmm.
Um, I, yeah, I 100% would say read The Name of the Wind, and it will probably be the best magic book you could possibly read.
Understandable. So I know you said the one-handed top palm is your favorite sleight. Do you find having a favorite sleight causes you to use it more and draw away from other moves, or do you find that it doesn't really have an effect?
I would say I mean, it definitely has the fact that it becomes a favorite. I think it becomes a favorite because it's been used so often.
Okay.
I don't think it's A causes B. I think it's B causes A, right? I
Okay.
think the fact that I spent a lot of years mastering that, and it's such a useful palm because most people don't hold a deck with two hands. That's a
Hmm.
magician thing, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like people who are really good at the one-handed bottom palm, right?
Hmm.
The fact that it can be done with a single hand lends itself to the way normal people interact with a deck of cards, which makes it so much more deceptive because it's happening at a time when it seems like nothing like that could happen. And it's a very difficult thing to get right,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of fine touches on it, and there's a lot of things that have more to do with who you are than the form that it could be executed. Like, yeah, obviously, put pressure with your pinky on the corner while, letting the deck act as a support. But everyone's hands are different. So you kind of got to learn this, like where it hits here
Hmm.
differently for everybody. So no one does the same one-handed top palm because no one's hands are perfectly the same, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I like it so much is because I learned it and I got it, and I was terrible at it because you heard the click every
Yeah.
single time. And then I got more subtle at it. And then it was one of those ones that I could like do well on call. And then I discovered Glenn Morphew and found out that I could do it a completely different way. And then I discovered Ed Marlowe and found out I could do more than one card. And then I sat with Eddie McCall and found out that I could do it off of like a packet of four cards. Like it was just one of those things that I kept getting to add to it. So
Yeah.
honestly, it felt like you discover your favorite drink at Starbucks
Hmm.
and you drink it for like years and years. And then you find out, oh, like if I add a little cinnamon, ooh, that makes it holiday, right?
Yeah.
It was like that. I just kept
Okay.
adding stuff to my favorite drink, and then it just kind of became my favorite drink because I had made it inadvertently, I had made it my favorite drink the entire time.
Makes sense. Do you think social media has improved or tarnished magic?
I think it started off by improving it. I think it's trying to tarnish it. Um, and I don't think it's malicious. I think it's apathetic. I think that there's a hungry neutral algorithm, right? It's like neutral chaos,
Hmm.
right? It's not that like tornadoes aren't hunting people and yet they still leave devastation in their wake. That's sort of what I feel like social media ended up trying to do because before the premise was find your people,
Yeah.
right? Find your community. And then the premise was, well, we need to advertise to that community. And that didn't work so well. So then the premise was, well, now that everyone has their thing, let's take away the sense of community by not showing you the people that you follow, by not showing you the content that you actually subscribe to, but showing you things adjacent to it.
Hmm.
And then we can advertise to you individually because now we don't need the buy-in of your community. We just need you individually and your interests, right?
Hmm.
Um, And I think that part is pretty destructive. I think my most positive experience of social media was that camaraderie. It was that community, and that community was real. I've
Hmm.
had friends that say it was never real. It was real. It was temporary. I think it had its time, and that time is probably done. You probably need to go somewhere other than Instagram or Facebook or TikTok to find that community again.
Yeah.
Um, but I think if it can be done if you can hold out on that, I think that, ends up being a lot stronger.
Okay,
Um, so yeah, I would say that it has the capability to do good things. It is a bit harder now because the algorithm doesn't lend itself to that anymore.
understandable. I see many people pick up magic but don't stick with it. Do you think it requires a certain type of person to stick with magic, or is it more experience based, whether they have a positive or negative experience?
I think that that's definitely, I don't know. That's the thing. For me, I wish I could say that for me it was like this deep art that had to come out. A Rilke in Letters to a Young Poet,
Hmm.
right? He says like a thing is art if it's something that you must do, right? If it's something that you must, it's a part of you that you must express, right? And then whatever comes out is art. And if it is that, then it is good, right? I wish I could say that's how I approach this, but it was very selfish. Like
Hmm.
if it made me relaxed and I enjoyed the experience, then I kept with it. Um, I think the people that stick with it are the people who either get something out of it intrinsically, like it's just sort of like it's kind of a part of them. And that I would say is true of me. And then there are some people who stick with it because they get something out of it extrinsically, right? They get positive feedback from the outside.
Hmm.
And I think that's the more dangerous one because there are far fewer people who who I think get that positive feedback externally and stay with it because those people I think are the ones who end up becoming professionals,
Yeah.
right? The people who the majority of their feedback comes from the external experience of magic, right? I will do magic to a blank wall. I've been doing magic to a camera that doesn't blink for years now,
Yeah.
right? I don't particularly need somebody else in the room to enjoy magic. Um, and so I can stick with it whether I was on a desert island or not.
Hmm.
For people where the predominant importance of magic is the experience of magic that they can generate in others, I think those people, it is, I would say there are three different types of people that I've seen from that side, right? The first is they they get positive feedback and now they've got a thing. And that was me early on, right? Now they've got like I'm a magician, I can make people surprised. I can make people feel amazed, right? Um, and then there are the people who it's not about what they can do, it's the fact that it happens on the other person's side, right? It's a
Hmm.
very generous experience of that. Um, those people, I think, are like the Helders. Those
Okay.
people, I think, are like the Brandon or the not Brandon's. Like there's just I don't know. It's a very generous approach that I think the fact that they want to be responsible for it, but not necessarily take credit for it. They want to leave it in a person's hands.
Hmm.
I think that's like Ben Earl does that. That's why I respect these guys so much, right? Um, so I would say, yeah, and then the one that I think is probably the most insidious is the person that needs that feedback. And if they don't get it, it embitters them,
Okay.
right? If they don't get the feedback that they need, I think that's hard. It's a very, very hard thing, right? Like I've experienced this where I effectively think I'm a wizard, right? Give me a deck of cards. I can pretty much do what I want with
Yeah.
it, right? But I am also so much more impressed with myself than most of the world is with me, right? Like
Fair.
I really love like give me a deck, give me a camera, and I can pretty much do whatever I want. But I went at one point to go do what I was doing here at the outside world, and it did not get the same reaction. As it turns out, the outside world doesn't care that I can Pharaoh shuffle. They don't care, right? And I had that experience, and it was a very troubling experience for me. It was like a reset where I
Hmm.
found out, oh, yeah, actually, like the outside world has a very different expectation interpersonally than it does when it's scrolling videos on Instagram, right?
Yeah.
And so I've definitely been that guy. I've watched friends who because they didn't get the feedback from the outside world, despite having given this years, it did sort of taint their experience of magic, right? It embittered them. And I think that's sad. And I I would hope that they could find sort of like that relief intrinsically, right? That because they're brilliant at
Hmm.
this. They may never be famous for it, but they are yet still brilliant.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think that is the people that stick with it. I would hope they stick with it mostly because of like an intrinsic fuel or from a generous spirit of the fact that they can cause in others this thing that those people would never experience from any other art form.
understandable. From knowledge of previous world chess masters such as Emanuel Lasker to magic history, I've noticed you are very well informed historically. Have you always enjoyed learning about history, or did that come later in life?
Came later, much later, much later. Yeah, I had to live a little.
Fair?
Um, I think some of it was like I'm 42. I started doing magic when I was 7.
Okay.
I started working for bookstores in my early 20s. Um, but when I was working for bookstores, I was just reading to sort of like explore. I think I didn't find out the relevance of history until I had kids
Hmm.
and I was able to sort of like get outside of my own head. You know, when one of the things that I think is unique about having children is that they don't care what you got going on,
Hmm.
right? Like they're babies and they need everything from you. And whatever you had going on is unimportant to that situation because they need you, right? And what's strange about that is that you would think those two things are unrelated, right? Um, but because I was outside of myself, I was able to look at the outside world and find importance in other people and their life experiences. And now all of a sudden, I had an appreciation for what they were going through,
Hmm.
right? I could relate to the idea of being scared for my child's well-being because I was not in particular control of everything that was happening because I wasn't the only thing in play anymore,
Yeah.
right? My children were there and I could not control the world around them. I could take the hits. If it was just me, I could take the hits. No problem, right? But because it was my children, I didn't want my children to take the hits. I could take the hits for them, but I could not control the world and how it would affect them in particular, right? Studying history is finding that out. It is finding out how much of it is agency and how much of it is the time you grew up, right? The people that were around you, the country that you lived in, the political climate that you were surrounded by. And all of that was suddenly relevant because I was living it,
Hmm.
right? Before I was sort of obsessed with like self-help and all this other stuff, and all of that is about this sort of like useful fiction of personal agency in all situations. And that may not be true. Um, and history paints that picture pretty well, right? So you look at somebody like Emanuel Lasker. Emanuel Lasker should be somebody who is, I think, much more prevalent in the general world, but is only known by chestnuts,
Yeah.
right? Um, there are other people, that I feel like if you studied history, and especially from like a focus point of view, you would find out how many people's paths crossed, right?
Yeah.
Especially because go back far enough, there were far fewer people, right?
Yeah.
Um, but this is why I think like, especially studying magic history and everything, I do think that it is important, if only because I think it could do the reverse. I think I was drawn outside of myself by my children, and it gave me an appreciation for the world around me and the things that affected that world. I think that if you studied history earlier, it could do that for you in reverse, right? By studying history, it could draw you outside of yourself. You
Okay.
could see, you could, instead of trying to find yourself in other people, you could let other people affect you and who you become, right? So instead of like seeing the world through you colored glasses, you could wear their glasses, right?
Okay,
So yeah, read a couple history books. That's what I would say.
understandably. What's a topic specifically magic related that you find very interesting that most people tend to gloss over?
Misdirection. I know it seems like everyone is studying this, and they're not.
Hmm.
I don't think, I think the careful study of the useful manipulation of attention is a careful study that you could make and utilize in a way that I don't, I think we get it by osmosis,
Hmm.
right? I don't think like we get it because it is useful to the end of like the trick, right?
Yeah,
So like we'll study sleight of hand, but sleight of hand is mostly hiding the work,
yeah,
right? It is not necessarily misdirection, right? It's being good enough that even if they were looking at you, they wouldn't see anything, right? Whereas misdirection as a science is even if they were looking at you, they're not seeing anything. They're seeing what you meant for them to see. And they're telling the story in their head that you meant for them to tell themselves, right? Like misdirection isn't just about sight, it's also about, hearing. It's also about memory. It's also about like, even if they saw, this is one of the reasons why the Spaniards are so interesting to me, is because that is something that they do like chase.
yeah,
Philosophically speaking, they chase
definitely.
this, right? And I think that to study it from that vantage point, to study it from this idea that yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why doing it for a camera is so useful, is because it doesn't blink. It
Hmm.
doesn't look away, right? And you find out very quickly that people can replay videos, right? So before you used to be able to hide behind the fact, well, they could only watch it once. Well, now they could watch it a million times. They
Yeah.
could download it and they could play it in slow-mo, right?
Hmm.
And so you have to make that part irrelevant. The only way that you can do that is to learn, like the fact that, like, are your shoulders up or are they down? How does that affect people's perception, right? If you study body language, if you study micro expressions, if you study yourself and the way that you interact with things, right? Like when you learn palming, the most deceptive palm is the palm that looks like your particular hand when it's empty.
Yeah.
And that should seem obvious, right? You would think that that would be an obvious step, but I didn't figure that out until they put cameras on cell phones. And I took a picture of my hand and then I palmed a card and realized it looked nothing like the first picture. And now all of a sudden I've got a goal, right? I think misdirection is one of those things where, much like card magic, it in itself is a study unto its
Hmm.
own, right? Um, and I think that, yeah, you could probably go down a long road and it wouldn't just be in magic, right?
Definitely.
You should study things like human psychology, propaganda. You should study body language. You should study microexpressions. You should study the generation of human emotion, right? And all of these, you are probably 5 non-magic books away from being the best informed authority on the subject of misdirection as far as magic is concerned within your circle. It's just you don't know that those subjects are relevant to your presentation, right?
Understandable.
So, yeah.
So I've had mentors of mine tell me that science and psychology are still catching up to what magic already knows. Do you find that to be true?
No,
No?
no, not even remotely.
Okay.
I think that's probably I think that's probably a false dichotomy. I don't think that they're opposing. And I think it's probably a bit um, arrogant of magicians to say that they know a thing because we don't.
Understandably. Yeah.
I don't think that we actually know what we think we know.
Hmm.
I think that we've developed a narrative and a mythology around what we know that may have nothing to do with the outside world. And probably the best advocate that I think you should study is Alice Paes.
Okay.
She is a French magician and uh, a doctor in psychology,
You had an interview
who,
with her, right?
yeah,
Okay.
and she actually does the research.
Yeah.
where she finds out, like, for instance, you would figure that the selecting of a card would appear more free than the riffling down and cutting of a card,
Mhm.
right? Because all of them are presented to you. That's not true. The evidence doesn't point toward that,
Yeah.
right? It's just we make that assumption because it seems like common knowledge, right?
Mhm.
It seems like that should be the case. But so much of magic is based on this idea of, well, yeah, that should be the case. That should be how the audience sees this situation because that's how I see this situation.
Yeah.
But we have the curse of knowledge, right? We suck at being muggles.
Mhm.
We just do, right? Once we know the method, we can't help but view it from the perspective of somebody that knows the method. We have no idea what it is to be the person who doesn't know anything about method. They never look for that. They're just looking at what it is, right? Um, it's like the old adage, right? The user is smarter than the programmer,
Yeah.
right? Because the programmer can't help but see it for its gears. They can't help but see it for its components and for its inputs and outputs. But the user is the person trying to do the thing, right? And so when they have a program that is supposed to do the thing for them and it doesn't do the thing, to the user, it is broken, no matter how beautiful the code is,
Mhm.
right? In Magic, it's much the same. The audience is the smartest person in the room. The magician is not, right? The audience is the one that views the thing for what it is. We view the thing for everything that we put into it.
Yeah.
And so, no, we are not. So, like psychology does have, because they've been studying the human mind for much longer than magicians have been studying the human mind. I
Definitely.
think we like this narrative where we're the smartest person in the room and now you see me and all that fun stuff. And I don't think that's true. I think that we still have a lot of catching up to do. I think this is something where like we developed a language and we think we know the language because we can write poetry,
Mhm.
but we don't know what to call the parts of that poetry, right?
Okay.
We know how to feel our way backwards through it, but we don't see it as it is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. What about a topic compels or inspires you to make a YouTube video about it?
Mm. If I have to get it out, if I have to like talk about it, there's a couple of videos. That's the other thing is I sort of dropped off because I found out that I really wanted to be able to tell a story well visually.
Mhm.
Like I'm pretty good at telling a story verbally, right?
Yeah.
But there's only so much that you can like stare at me sitting at this table with that background talking about a subject. I wanted to be able to tell a story visually in a way that was intriguing. And so actually I kind of dropped off. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who he's also in the 52. Um, and he is he's a very, very gifted cinematographer. And I told him this. I just said, hey, I feel like I lack in this. And so he said, okay, well then take every camera that you own, right, and pare it down to one camera, one lens, right? So I had full frame camera, 35 millimeter.
Mhm.
And he's like, and learn to see the world through that. Just learn, as close as you can get to the way that you see the world naturally, find a combination, camera and lens, that can effectively create the same visual
Yeah.
for you. And then learn to see the world through that. And then learn to express the world through that. And then that's a pretty good starting point, right?
Yeah.
And so I dropped off of YouTube specifically to go learn how to do that,
Okay.
right? So now there's like 3 videos that I really, really want to do, but I refuse to do them until I can invest in them everything that I've learned over the course of these past couple of years. Is because I really want to be able to tell that story well. And for
Yeah.
me, that means telling it visually as well as verbally, right? I want to be able to tell the story of how, like Emmanuel Lasker, right? The fact that he introduced the world to the concept of zugzwang and how
Mhm.
zugzwang is so much um, the Jonah card principle
Yeah.
and that they relate, right? I want to be able to tell the story of Titanic Thompson and the idea of how, a con man and a card cheat who literally at one point was jamming with Houdini has affected magic in a way that we will never fully measure, right? I want to be able to tell those stories, but I can't tell them verbally because we don't have the attention span
Hmm.
anymore. It's not, I could tell that story to you and I sitting in a cafe all day long, but telling it on YouTube, it takes a different thing now.
Yeah.
And I want to do that well, so I'll do it then.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I would say the only way now that I can be compelled is if I can get it out in a way that I feel like honors what that subject is to me.
Makes sense. In your opinion, who are some of the greatest storytellers in Magic?
Well, Helder.
Hmm.
Helder's an easy one. Uh, you know, um, uh, surprisingly, this is funny. You'd never think, um, you'd never think that this would like serve well, but Steve Valentine is probably the best storyteller of his own personal life because he is so busy telling other people's stories that when he tells the story of his life, everything that he has invested in telling other people's stories gets infused
Hmm.
into him. And he had this one little box theater show in Studio City years ago. Um, I must have gone to see that show 3 times. And it is one of the most compelling magical performances I've ever been a part of.
Okay.
Because it's one of those things where you can't look away. He tells the story of the Russian.
Hmm.
It's him meeting his wife. And it is one of the most beautiful pieces of magic that I've seen because, again, there's so much of him, right? Um, Strongest examples, I think, probably are Ricky Jay telling the history and making it relevant. Um, Obviously, Derek Delgadio, right, with his show. I've
Yeah.
never cried during a magic performance until him, right? But again, as much as I celebrate that show in and of itself, I still think Helder is pushing it further. And those two used to be partners, right?
Hmm.
Um, I still think Helder is pushing it further because he does that consistently and in different forms, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I would say, and then there are people that I think are effectively magicians because they're such profound storytellers. You know, perfect example would be, let me think, James Burke.
Okay.
James Burke is the guy who created the show Connections back in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the fact that he could draw connections between everything and make all of that deeply interesting, right? I
Yeah.
think that was a beautiful trick of magic. I think everyone should probably study um, professional editors and cinematographers.
Okay.
And I say that only because so very often they are doing the thing that we hope to do in real life,
Yeah.
right? They're making a thing real in a way that we are only just brushing the surface on, you know. Like as good as we are, these guys have been doing this like since light could be captured on film, right? Um, I want to say, is it Sir Richard Deacon? He did a movie, right? The Murder of Jesse James by the Coward something something. And don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful movie. There is one scene where they're going to rob a train, and you can look this up on YouTube, right?
Okay.
Where they're going to rob a train, and this train is coming, and it's in a dark forest. It's in the middle of the night,
Hmm.
and they've got nothing but lanterns. And this train coming is one of the most haunting and beautiful scenes I have ever seen in any movie ever. And I didn't get it. I didn't get why this like why is this scene like always on the cover of like cinematography books and everything? And then I saw the scene, I was like, oh, of course, that's why. But this is a beautiful trick of magic. It is remarkable, and everyone should see this scene because the build up to it seems like nothing, and then all of a sudden there's this beautiful scene in what seems like this dismissible moment, and yeah, you need to see it. So yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
So I know you mentioned that you've developed your vocabulary and ability to speak well through different books. Would you say you refined that by reading more, or by reviewing yourself, or by some other method?
Um, Honestly, vocabulary wise, I sort of feel like a kid with a shotgun.
Okay.
Like I've got a lot of ammo, and
hmm
sometimes I don't use it well. Um, I'll use 10 words when two will do.
hmm
Um, I think everyone should find, this sounds odd, find your favorite essayist, right? Not necessarily favorite author, because narrative is different than expression,
Yeah.
right? Telling a story, sometimes the story is so good, three different people could tell it completely differently, and it doesn't change the value of that story, right?
hmm
Um, but essayists have to communicate in brief. And like I've got a favorite, Brian Doyle, right? And Brian Doyle can make you care about something so quickly because of how he expresses it. And it's just beautiful, right? I think that everyone, more than studying vocabulary, vocabulary is the Lego pieces,
hmm
right? Um, but when you study things like metaphor and simile and analogy and um, rhetoric, I think when you study those things, you find out just how far language can go. Jim Rohn actually has a really good point on this, right? He says words are like a pin, right?
hmm
And I could throw that pin at you, and you might not even feel it,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the emotion, right? The story, the everything that you are, that you can put behind the words, that's like an iron bar, right? And
Okay.
I could wire that pin to the end of that iron bar, and now I could take that pin and I could drive it through your heart,
hmm
right? I think if you could study the things that make up that iron bar, that's far more impressive than the number of words that you have.
Okay. Makes sense. So I've heard you mention either philosophical takes regarding magic or even quoting people like Thomas Aquinas. Have you always been more philosophically minded, or did that come later in life as well?
Definitely came later. I had
Oh,
to I had to live a little. I think there's a trick that gets played on everybody who studies a lot, where they think that studying is the same thing as knowing.
hmm
And it's like the difference between tacit knowledge and book knowledge, right? You can read someone's ideas and you can quote them verbatim, but that idea isn't your own until you've had to live it,
hmm
right? It's like you could quote everything about courage, but until you've had to fight your own goddamn fear and do that thing, you don't know what courage is, right? Um, and so for a lot of years, I could quote everything about courage and then I had to live it.
Yeah.
And then it became real. It's sort of like history isn't important until you've had a bit of history,
hmm
right? And I think philosophy isn't important until that philosophy becomes useful. Until then, it's just pretty words, right? It's beautiful musings. It's like magic theory, right? Like you could swim in magic theory all day long, and it's beautiful until you have to sit in front of 50 people and make them feel a thing.
Fair.
Now, all of a sudden, magic theory becomes much more relevant because you understand like all those pieces now have something hard to latch onto,
hmm
right? Before then, it's just beautiful floating ephemera, and then all of a sudden it's scaffolding, right?
Okay.
So yeah, I think make a careful study of yourself, journal a lot, and that will help because then it will give you something to attach to. Review that, right? Make
hmm
a book of your life, and the best book that you will ever read is probably the one that you want to write to yourself. And you read other books because you want to learn to express what is in you well. And I think that will probably be more useful to you than reading 1,000 books, Like again, I do think the collection of knowledge is great, but also you can get lost in that. You can
Yeah.
just, instead of doing the thing, you think, oh, I'll just read 5 books on that, and that will be the same thing. And it won't be,
Hmm.
right? You could read 1,000 books on how to ride a bike, and it doesn't mean you balance any better, right? You may have the rhythms and you may know what the best type of bike is, but until you buy the damn bike and you get on it and you start pedaling, all of that means nothing. You need to like get that tacit knowledge. So you get that through, I think, like living and then reviewing.
Okay. If you could do magic for anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Gabby,
Fair?
instantly, Gabby
Fair?
Pereira's. And then I'd make him do something for me. That was the one dude that I feel like I missed out on. Like, don't
Okay.
get me wrong. I missed the idea of sitting with Ricky Jay,
Yeah.
right? When I was a kid, that was my hero. I used to say, right, he could be sick and he could call me and I could do his show verbatim, right?
Hmm.
Um, but Gabby was the one I never got to sit with. We never got to know each other. I got to know everyone around him.
Yeah.
I backed the play of the guys that were trying to support his legacy, but I never got to sit with him. And I am in my own head, I am so very much an amateur. I don't think that what I do is unique to magic. I think it's maybe unique to the presentation of magic on social media, but outside of that, I don't think it's unique to magic.
Hmm.
Gabby was to me unique and in a way that I never got to fully explore because so much of his work was unpublished,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I'd absolutely like, yeah, I'd give up all 4,000 decks just to sit with that dude, right? But yeah, Gabby,
All
hardcore.
right. And then the last question I have for you is if you could ask your future self one question, what would it be?
Mhm. Good question. What are you happy with that you never thought?
Okay.
Because that's what I found out, when I turned 40. I've got all the journals, right? I've
Yeah.
been journaling forever. And what's funny is what I thought would make me happy, what I thought I desperately needed, I didn't need. What I thought would make me happy when I got it, did not,
Hmm.
right? It was all the things I never could have seen coming.
Yeah.
My wife, never, never in a million years. I grew up in Santa Ana, right? Santa Ana is predominantly Hispanic. I always figured that I would marry somebody Hispanic.
Hmm.
My wife is from Minnesota. She is very pale, right? And yet she is the best of me, right? My children, I never could have picked their personalities. I always sort of figured I'd know who my children would be. I just figured they'd be little copies of me. They are
Hmm.
not. And they are chaotic. And I barely sleep. And you'd never think that would amount to happiness, and yet it does,
Yeah.
right? I would desperately want to know, just have a heads up on all the things that I think I'm chasing now that are worthwhile, that that version of me looks back on and says, you have no idea, right?
Yeah.
Because then it would allow me to focus on the thing that actually matters,
Okay.
right? So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you for being willing to do this and taking time out of your day for it.
No, of course. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm honored.
Yeah.
It was really kind to you.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, you've been someone I've been looking up to for quite some time now, so definitely enjoyed
yeah.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. That's really cool. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I got into social media a little bit late, but I started in 2018 and you were within the first 10 people that I started following. So,
Wow,
yeah.
dude. Okay, that's really cool. Oh, thank you so much for doing it. Well, yeah, if there's anything that I can do to be helpful, say the word, Thunderbird.
No worries. Thank you.
All right. Well, cool. Well, please go have a great day and thanks for the chat.
Thank you. You as well.